Hey there, this is Brad Dyke reaching out to you, and today, as I promised I would continue to do, is some hardware stuff, and also later on today I'll do some software and design stuff. Today we're talking about something really cool. Today we're breaking something again. Here's a traditional Seagate NAS chassis, which I've used in the past to demonstrate how to flip out the 3.5s and build, some old 2.5 inch SATA based drives and basically get this to work, and it does, and it's functional. But what else can we do? And the answer to that question is if we take the hard drives out of this, which are true spinning hard disks, and we instead put these in. Check that out. And these are very light, which means that when they're slotted into their slots, they're going to stay in place. Now, for experimentation purposes only, this would be really cool. If not, I have to put what's called a lead edge at the top of one of these sides to act as a kind of like a snap-in in the bay itself. And I would put these M.2 SATAs, so if you look there, these are SATAs. And SATAs are fine. You don't need to do NVMe because you'll never get performance from this, like this NVMe here that you see, which is a 2 terabyte. And also, I thought, what the heck? We can also use redacted, in other words, where we strip off all of the unnecessary components of a 2.5 inch SSD SATA, and we can play with this too. These are two 128 gig partitions right here. So these are all 128s, and my thought was, can I get it in here? Can we do it? Is it doable? And so on. So the first thing I've got here is I've got an ATOL style M.2 standard to SATA output interface. That's this guy right here. It comes with the series of lockdown nuts and bolts to secure the card that goes into this unit. So that's all I've done here. So let me take a minute here, and I'll go ahead and sleeve these in and secure them real quick. Okay, so now we've got ourselves 3 of these units. I kind of like the boards. I kind of don't like the boards. My review on this is the screw setup is a little awkward. I actually found that using the open standard screws were more efficient, and they kept the board more stabilized opposed to their little brass fitter version. And of course I'm going to use one of these. I'm going to try to use this one as the boot set drive, but I may have to reformat this drive first, but I'll have to do that to make sure. As you can see, I've already taken this apart, and we're going to set some of these components away. And as you can see inside there, that was my little experiment I did way back when. I'm going to just pull these guys out. And this worked out really well, especially with the weight, because it kept the spacers in check. So I was really pleased with it, but I'm not doing this for use. I don't have a use for such a small device. So I decided I was going to go ahead and continue to experiment with it and grow with it. Work with the Daughter based board down here underneath, as you can see, and to just kind of get this tweaked out as much as possible. Now, the nice thing about this strategy that I'm doing is I'm really not going to be dependent too much on the 2 gig of RAM that's down inside this unit for caching, because it's not going to do us any good. So I'm going to go ahead and put these units in. Stand by for a second. Okay, very easy, and they actually snap in. Okay, so really not only did they just snap in, but they secured themselves. I did realize, though, if I'm going to use the SSD drive SATA insert, I inserted it second to last because I wouldn't have the hand space to insert that unit if I did that way. Now, these 3 should run just fine. That one may not, because it's been formatted, and this particular Seagate 400 NAS likes to have blank drives that can reformat. So I'm going to now take the time and rebuild this, get it back to put together, and we'll secure it, and we'll do some additional checking with it and see if it will initiate at least the 3 drives out of the 4. And as you can see, this is pretty doggone simple. And those cards cost me $2 each. That's right. One of these M.2 series Daughter adjustment cards only cost me roughly $2. I spent a total of roughly $12 in shipping to get these, and then I had basically $20 NVMe 128 gig capacities. Now those are normal for boot drive testing, but I said, what the heck, let's see what we can do with this, you know. Now I'll show you something else after this that's doable as well as a side note, but the important detail is that we first test this out. Okay, so we put this together, and if you look right there, it is working, and it is creating. And this is a success for my little NAS. Now, all this is going to do for you, in reality, to be honest with you, is it's going to absolutely get the absolute maximum I/O you could possibly get for an I/O NAS, which is basically known as an IP NAS. Why? Because the storage capacity platform that handles the disks and the 1 gigabit output on the back end are two totally different things. Now, with caching, as in you have memory that you can cache, you can improve that to some degree. But since this is SATA M.2, in a nutshell, it's really fast, so it's not going to cache much. But this is how you can truly take an old-style disk-style NAS and transform it into a non-spinning disk NAS and be successful. Now, not every single time will this work. That's the key detail here. But there's more to talk about, because let me show you some other caveats about how impressive this little card can actually be. Okay, now we've kind of moved away from something, but that's okay. I have a reason why I'm doing that, and I want to show you. So, really, in a nutshell, there's more to this little gadget than you think. And I want to first start off with something like this, which is a EMC Dell standard caddy for a spinning disk. Watch what I do. So when I disassemble this unit, right, and as you can see, I have my SAS drive with the SAS interface set, and then I have this little guy right here, which is a universal Daughter bridge card. Now technically I could put the SSD drive on here as such. Okay, as you can see, I have got myself an SSD SATA based connection, and it's sitting on the Daughter bridge card that would normally be holding or housing the hard drive, as you can see here with this 2 terabyte drive. And surprisingly, I could put heat sinks on this guy and, you know, have it mounted correctly over here, and it would slide right into the slot here and work. And now, as you can see, ta-da, fully operational, slides right in, and surprisingly stays secured, and that's good. So with that being the case, I was able to secure that unit. Now let's do something else slightly different. Now, you see, now that we've got this set, I'm going to pull that back out. Maybe we can do something else even cooler. So check this out. So as you can see here, that is absolutely outstanding, which means I can now put M.2 standards in there and be able to basically set them up the way I want in regards to the configuration, so I can get myself a good setup. So that's saying something, but what if we had something more complicated than a Dell EMC standard SAS disk array? What if we had like a net app, like this guy right down here? Well, let's take a look. Okay, so here we have a DS2246 2-inch drive caddy. As you can see, there's the hard drive, there's the interface bus, and so on and so on. So we're going to take this guy out, put that right there, and let's do the SSD drive first. Okay, well, that's just too doggone easy. Look at that. Isn't that just It's just simple. I've got about a 2mm clearance on that side and a whole bunch of clearance on this side. I could, if I wanted to, do some adaptive aluminum heat sinking just to add a little bit of extra protection for the drive, because it would get used pretty heavily. Because that's what a 2246 does. It will use the heck out of hard drives. So they got to be good quality. So that's one stretch. And of course, what if I took the M.2 and put it in here? Let's check. Okay, I'm not going to lie to you. This is perfectly matched. I've got the right clearances on both sides. The M.2 Daughter bridge card, which would hold the M.2 card, has plenty of breathing space on both sides. You could put a heat sink on this with no issues. And it's just too doggone easy. And it snaps into place. And as you know, the M.2 is very light, even with a heat sink. It doesn't go anywhere. It's solid. It's not going to get loose. You know, obviously, you're not going to go down, driving down a road with a 2246 in your back seat. So running the risk of becoming loose, especially if you use a small little edge tape right here, just to make sure that it stays well seated. Or you can put a little back edge tape down here too. Same thing. Perfect. That is perfect. And we already know that the M.2 stack works with this because I use these already. So I'm not concerned about an LS controller, being able to determine that the M.2 exists, because it's treated as a SATA device, opposed to, because this is going to be M.2 SATA, not NVMe. Don't put in NVMe in this unless you first vet it and make sure that it's usable. I am pretty sure it won't work right, but for this, it's still impressive because look at that. I mean, it's just it's terribly light. It really is light. I'm really surprised by how unrestricted it is. You could probably put a spacer lock in there, but man, that just goes right in. Number 13 is, number 12? Yeah, number 14. No issues. Now, isn't that really cool? I think it's cool, isn't it? Anyways, like I said, these M.2 cards run about $2 a pop. And they're pretty sweet. Now, I don't like how it secures the M.2 drive. Could be better. But actually, it's all right. Considering if you look there in the edge connector, it's only one-sided. It's on the right side when it's being pushed down on it, so that's still good. And with that being said, and you're working with these, you can really take some old stuff and reinvent it, put it into use, and to get it to become usable again in the way that you want it to do its job. So I just thought that would be something really cool for you to see and be able to kind of get a feel for it as you're working with it. And this would give you the ability of knowing how these systems would cross-platform, because these were never designed to handle M.2. Now, though, they were designed for SATA, and SATA emulation is how we're able to do this. This is not something that is functional if you were going to do more like an M.2 bridge connection or an M.2 card interface. That's a totally different approach for interfacing. But when you're able to come out with a SATA output, anything is functional. That little SATA connection right there is what makes this feasible. With that being said, the rest of this is pretty decent. There is basically just 2 transistors on this set, nothing else. So it's basically, I suspect the transistors to support the power side of the equation. But outside of this is just too terribly easy to work with. It really is. I'm impressed with this. I might get myself another 20 of these and maybe do a 24 array setup here on the 2246. I don't know. I'll do something. I'm still waiting. Now, one thing else about this in detail is if you do choose to go with the Dell EMC low profile 24 bay array, which is this guy right up here, the one I'm transitioning to from my 2246, it actually pushes the M.2 into the SATA slot. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So, if you look here, I put the M.2 in the slot again, and as you can see, it's snugly in place, and on this side as well. But if you look up here, look how close of a fit that is. It keeps it stationary at the mid-level. So what that basically means in a nutshell is I've got a little bit of pressure, not a lot, making sure that this slot does not come out of place. And that is a very nice little feature with these smaller cases. Now, the only thing about these guys is if you're not careful, you can kind of wiggle them a little. They don't have structure to them, unlike the, unlike this, which has a lot more rigid structure to it. But still, I'm impressed with it. I really am. It's not. I think, you know what this could do? I could probably use one of these, but I have to do it in a special way to put it into a Dell slot, because these Dell slots don't function the same way. They don't have a bridge daughter card you can plug into. They just directly plug in, right? So that's a little bit of a challenge. But it would basically mean I'd have to have a baseboard that I could allow this to sit on. And I got a screw mount right there, and I got a screw mount right there that could allow me to do that. And so what that basically means that if I take out, the SSD drive, the SAS drive here, in this case it is a SATA drive, and I put a small plastic platform, and then I aligned, let me see if I can do this right, and then I would align them up correctly, because as you can see, they don't do that in the industries at all. They're never centralized, so you could never put this in here. It wouldn't work. It's too incompatible. But there's just a slight, I'd say about a millimeter, maybe 0.5 millimeter off, and it's to this side, and that would allow you to secure this in place. But the cool news about it is, I'll bet you if you just take your time, you can figure out how to do that, and it would work for you. Okay, so stand by here for a second while I flip back over to the other side. Okay, so now we're coming back to the Seagate NAS-400 here, and the Armor platform is already at constructing the file system, and that means it's moving at about 240, maybe 260% faster, because I'm not in a build state anymore. It's doing a RAID build out, which is cool, right? And granted, I'm not going to have a lot of space on this because these are my diag stack, M.2 capacitances. But the key detail is that even though these little suckers work, and they do really work well, I'm really impressed with them. They're cheap, they're functional, they aren't slow, and they're not super fast. They don't need to be, because they're way faster than spinning disks. So overall, I'm pleased with them. And as you can see, this format will give you the ability of being able to do quite a bit. So with that being said, the last thing I'm going to do is, of course, I will go into the registered IP address that this will have. This will probably reboot in the next 20 minutes or so. It took 7 hours last time, which is, wow. What an improvement right there. It just doesn't take nearly as long because there's no moving parts. So with that being the case, my thought and strategy would be to turn around and say, okay, guys, that's a worthwhile upgrade to give you life and longevity back to your old NAS or your paired arrays. Let me show you what I mean by that. So a pair array is this. This is where it takes 2 hard drives, drive 1 and drive 2, and it basically sets them up in such a way so that they will mirror each other in accomplishing their pairing and to present available disk capacity. Now I'm going to take this brick and I'm going to turn it into something else. So stand by for a second. So as you can see, this has 2, look at the size of these things, 3.5 interlocked bays for 2 hard drives that will support each other in a RAID 1 mirror. which is known as RAID 10. It's basically a RAID 1 presented as a single disk as RAID 0. And this basically, in the reality of the fact, is two paired hard drives working together to present themselves as one hard drive. So we call that RAID 10. So I'm going to take these drives out. And if you look, right there, SATA cables. That will be interesting because that means I have a little bit of a challenge here. So let's see what happens. Okay, so now, if you look here, you'll see these hard drives are just kind of sitting there, right? And they don't actually have a bridge or a slot or anything like that. And they have power and SATA to them. Now, something to understand that this is not a NAS at all. This is a USB-based device, USB 2.0, and is basically a reserve archive platform. But it does have FireWire, where it's set in eSATA. Now, eSATA would be the right way to go with this. Forget the USB. You know, you can use FireWire. I'm not a big fan of FireWire. But eSATA, perfect. That's what you want. Because, you see, with these jumpers right down here, you have a RAID controller on this unit. And that's the logic board under here. I'm going to show it to you in just a second. Okay, so right there is the eSATA controller. Right there. See that? You got to make sure your cables are well seated. Now, you have two independent stacks here, right here as well, for power, and two independent SATA interfaces, SATA 3. So that's basically 3 gigabit bandwidth. Now, if we took something like this, actually I wouldn't do this. I would do something else. Hang on a second. Okay, so I keep my 2.5 inch caddy shields like this because I like the fact that it's all plastic, right? And so I'm going to put these guys in here. I'm going to let them float a little bit. I got plenty of mounting points if I want to secure these permanently, but right now I don't. I just want to do a test, really, and to see if I can again trick the onboard SATA controller to treat these devices as literally no different than a normal hard drive. Now, let me see what I can do. I got to reconstruct this drive real quick. Okay, so this was actually a GX2 drive. I forgot that. So it does require that you put it back in the proper case, and here I've got another one, which is an SP. And I'm going to mount these guys up, and I'll see if they will work or not. It'll be interesting. I'll probably first start them off with USB and then take it from there. But let's see what happens. Okay, like I said, I'm not going to anchor these in, but if I were, I was just going to use these side screws to anchor these down right there if I wanted to. And I can remount these if I wanted to as well, but I don't really want to. I think this is just for play. Because this is an iOmega, yes, I said iOmega. If any of you guys remember the old days of zip drives, this is an iOmega driven device, and I'm going to close her back up and prepare her for a testing to see how well it does. But with that being said, I also want to check over here and see how we're doing. We're doing really well. All right. So the only thing that's slowing down this unit here is just the electronics and its age. All right, so let me put the shell back on this and flip it back over so it's ready for use. And wow, you don't even need the fan with this. It's just so much air in here. You can really play with these. You can really do some maneuvering. I put an extra empty SSD drive casing down here just to protect it from the aluminum. But, okay, so we've got this done now. And so here is the iOmega drive. And it would be preferable if you use the eSATA interface, but you don't have to successfully test this. All we have to do is to power cycle it up, allow it to set the RAID 1 configuration, then we can just use USB drive to connect and see if the drives pass through correctly. That's all we're trying to do here. So what I'll do to accomplish that is I will bring my laptop up, and then we'll run the test from that unit there, and will allow us to find out. Okay, so now we have the unit up and running, and this is a USB A to A output going into there, and this is a 2-prong wire power connector, which I don't like at all, not a fan of, but it has a 5 output pin connector interface, and we're basically able to run it on the hard drives, see the drives appear, but that's all. I just see 128 gigs. So for this particular experiment, this worked. Again, eSATA is the right pathway to go, but my notebook doesn't support eSATA. I could use DMS style management on the disks to further test them. But we know now that anything that does SATA emulation, if it may be an M.2 card or a standard SSD subpilot container, we now know for sure that we can make that happen. And I'll take these out right now. You can see them in there, and they are busy. Now, if I was to do this right, I would put in high capacity M SATAs in there, M.2 SATAs, that is, and it would give me the ability of doing quite a bit in there. But all in all, though, I'm pretty impressed with what this has done, and I really brought some new life to this array. Before I'm going to sell this array, get rid of it. It's just an old NAS array, and it's completely maxed out now. But I could put, these in here and secure them with a riser card right in here if I wanted to. But they're in there snug and they're good. They're not coming out easily. You're going to really have to hit this thing hard to hurt it that way. But it's functional. So with that being the case, I already know what's going to happen when I test it. I'm going to just get the maximum potential I can get from a 1 gig port, and that's it. We won't even touch the performance of these disks. But it's pretty cool. It's lighter, cleaner, easier to work with. It's not going to get nearly as complicated heat-wise, and so on and so on. And the fact that they just engaged is a great thing, and that really impresses me. All right. So, with that being said, this is my hardware little experiment. So, just wanted you guys to kind of get a gauge of it, and I'll be talking about the biggest no-nos you do in starting to develop your Docker environments for DevOps and continuous style deployments and strategies like that. People get the wrong mindsets when they begin doing this because they're thinking, how do I learn it? The more important part is how do you operate it? Very important detail, but I'll cover that in the next video. With that being said, this is Brad Dyke saying goodbye. Have a great week. God bless, and please be safe.